Yeah, come on up. This is a little too formal here.
Hey, look, it's my seat again. Last time I sat in the seat, I tried to break it.
All right, we'll get started. Thanks for having us. This is the panel on designing next-generation immersive experiences. I wanted to first kind of thank Eddie and the organizers for pulling this whole event off. It's pretty amazing for our first event. The selection or the curation of the speakers is pretty next level.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty unique gathering of individuals here. Before I introduce each of the panelists, I wanted to just kind of do a quick remark on the title of the panel. I think Next Gen is quite lofty. I think it's a very iterative, kind of messy space we're in. I think it's exciting, and I think you'd struggle to put a more capable panel together to discuss it, because you've got a lot of experience up here on the panel. And so if there are people that are pushing the boundaries or kind of figuring out what Next Gen is, at least in the current gen, I think you have some very wise voices here. So I'm going to introduce them individually. Start with Christine Catano, Global Head of VR at Framestore, right?
Yep, hi. I work for a company called Framestore. We're a visual effects company that creates all sorts of experiences from VR to AR to theme park rides and visual effects for film.
Cool. And I think we have a video for Christine.
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Jess Engel, founder of Crimes of Curiosity. Jess, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, my name's Jess Engel. I am the founder and producer of Crimes of Curiosity, which is an LA-based production company. It's focused on new media, so VR, AR. And one of the big projects that I'm producing right now is called Spheres. It's a 3-part series, virtual reality series that explores space through sound. So for the first episode that I'm about to show you a trailer of, it dives into the heart of a black hole. And we worked with a fantastic team, Protozoa, which is founded by Darren Aronofsky. He's our executive producer on it. We're working with a French production company called Atlas 5 to do all the visuals. And Jessica Chastain narrates the voice for this episode, and all of the sound is composed by the team that did Stranger Things, so Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein. So I'm going to show a clip of the trailer, and the series will be coming out in the fall. Oh, and it's directed by Eliza McNitt, I should say that.
You kind of buried that.
Yeah, buried that.
Can we cue the next video?
out there in the dark.
Sorry, John, you get to follow Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah,
So.
thanks.
Yeah, and last but not least, we have John Canning, executive producer of VR at Digital Domain.
Thank you. At Digital Domain, I can just say what she said. At Digital Domain, we're a full-service studio, traditionally in the VFX world, but expanded into short-form commercials, what we like, the whole XR space. So I'm the executive producer for AR, VR, and Interactive, which gives me a wonderful playground to think about people's ideas, to come up with original ideas, and not be encumbered by thinking, is it a AR experience or a VR experience, but trying to think about the best way to serve that experience and apply a variety of tools, even into live broadcast. Recently, I was talking with our live broadcast team, and I suggested, they were like, well, we're a 360 team, and I was like, well, you were, but now you've combined 2D rectilinear, you're combining 180, 360, you realize you're just a broadcast team. And stop worrying about the type of camera and start thinking about that we produce professionally quality live broadcasts. So with that, why don't I show a trailer?
Don't look so surprised.
Some fantastic work across the board. All right, so John, I'm going to start with you. Give you the hard one.
Thanks.
So I caveated my thoughts on what next gen, or that we're not really at a next gen, but given that, how would you define next gen immersive experiences, or are we even there yet?
Well, I definitely don't think we're there yet. And I think we're at this, which I find a fun time. I call it the messy time in this development, where we're constantly rewriting the rules that we established yesterday, and we break them today, and then tomorrow we'll come up with a new set, and then we'll break the day after that. If we look at all aspects of this, you know, if we were going to go make a film today, there's a lot of that that's already established. I may be breaking ground in the kind of story I'm telling, but there's a lot of the distribution model, the tools we use, a lot of that's established. In this medium, what's fascinating is that they're all tracking, and they're all being developed. And, you know, and I love what Ted said, it's the box on the face problem. It is messy, ergonomically difficult. And the next gen to me is when those things cease for that thing that we're making. The technology is no longer in your face, and we don't think about the technology. Right now, technology is very much in our face. That's fine because we're creators and we love playing with it. But if we expect that next gen, it's when the consumer is enjoying it and doesn't say, well, that's hard to do or that's uncomfortable. It's just they're enjoying the experience. and they're not thinking like the underlying things that got them there.
Yeah, I think the panel before, somebody mentioned that the technology is kind of leading right now in terms of the experience, whereas in other mediums, they're so advanced, the creative is sort of leading the way. Jess, do you have any thoughts on where we are as a medium? Or Jess? Oh, Jen.
Sure. I've been producing in the space for about 3 years, and I think the biggest change I'm starting to see is in terms of interaction. You know, initially a lot of the directors I would work with were creating more solo experiences, and even Spheres is a solo experience. It's not social, and more I think creators are starting to embrace this idea of social experiences in VR and interacting with other people, and what that means to interact with somebody in a virtual space. So whether you're co-creating or you are competing against one another or you're on an adventure together, what does that kind of interaction involve? So I think we're going to see more and more of those social experiences.
Then, did you? Okay. So the technology is constantly always shifting and arguably ahead of where the creative is. How do you stay on top of it? Like, what excites you about the medium, and how do you stay up to speed on the technology? Kristen?
I mean, I think, you know, there's always some aspect of looking at what's coming up next or trying to anticipate it, but I think, you know, in line with what John said, I think our goal, and it's kind of the goal of, if you look at even you know, pushing it back to filmmaking and visual effects and sound design, the goal of those mediums is to, I mean, the goal of those art forms is to make the technology disappear. Like, so you don't see all of the work that goes into, you know, CGI and visual effects, or you're not thinking about that as a user or as a viewer of that technology. So I think, you know, for us, it's not just looking at what the next thing is that's coming and leading with the technology. It's very much looking at how can you make that disappear, and it's changing your mindset a little bit to a more like user-centric approach.
Sure.
You know, the thing is that I think I would argue with the technology, it's holding back the creators in some degree. I mean, I see creative process, the folks that are really trying to go do something, and we can't do that yet, or we haven't developed a solution for that, or the real-time processing isn't there yet. So we still need that, though, as creators. We need to push that. And what I think is getting to that point where we say, what is the idea that we're trying to serve, or what's that thing we're trying to do, and then think of the underlying things we can do to make that happen. You know, I get excited about tool development, which is, it sounds stupid, but we're at this point where we're just working on tools to make our jobs easier. And every day I see amazing advances in editing suites, delivery mechanisms, the tools that are just going to enable what we want to do. And so that, to me, is just, you know, keep pushing that edge.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what they were sort of implying by that statement, was that the technology just gets in the way right now, right? And so we're sort of limited in the storytelling capabilities we can do. That said, what's an experience right now that sort of you feel is pushing the boundaries? Don't name your own, but is there a particular experience? And it doesn't have to be VR. I think immersive kind of covers a broader range, whether it's immersive theater, AR, VR, whatever. I'd love to kind of hear who you think's kind of leading the pack right now.
I'll just dive in. I think with interaction specifically, there's kind of I see two paths right now. The first path is really driven by games and the kind of interaction that's happening from especially like VR games. So Beat Saber that people have been talking about is great interaction design. Also something as simple as Super Hot, which is a really awesome VR game that has a very simple mechanic where as you move, time moves, and when you stop, time stops. And it's a really kind of one-to-one great way to use your body in the space. And then I think in the other very kind of different side of things, specifically talking about VR, because really good interaction, you know, what everyone's saying is like you forget about the technology. So because the tech isn't totally there yet, I think some of the best interaction is coming when you combine VR with a live action or sort of like a immersive theater experience. So something like Jack or Alice, where it's a experience that you put on a headset, but you're interacting with an actor in a space, and they're responding to you in real time, and they're, making jokes at you, and you're dancing, and they're like in real time acting to, responding to that. So to me, like, that is where the next generation of interaction is going to go, when the actor is going to one day probably be replaced by AI, or the technology kind of gets to that point. So I think that is kind of an indicator of where the next generation of interaction can really go to.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that, and I think to some degree, I said this earlier, but I think some of the more exciting things that I'm seeing are not coming out of the entertainment space at all. I think some of the VR and AR applications in healthcare and education are particularly exciting. Mm-hmm. And I think, not to undervalue what we all do, which is entertainment-based, but I think for a wider audience, those applications are really what make people stand up and say, I can actually see how this technology is going to have an impact on my life going forward, mm-hmm. As opposed to, a lot of the art and entertainment content that a lot of us have been building, which again, not to undervalue that at all, I just think the more utility-based applications are really doing it right because they're thinking about the user's application mm-hmm. when they're designing it, rather than thinking about a creator and what their story is that they want to tell.
There's two things I was thinking of. The first project, and I get my names all screwed up, Gabo and Nathan's Sufi project, the dancing, that was at Sundance, and that amazing way to experience another culture with other people in a virtual environment. And I think there's a lot of interesting experimentation that they're doing there. And then, Michael and Mueller and I were talking about a project that they've been working on addressing PTSD. So going to your point, which is I quickly get away from entertainment and I quickly get to things that are just doing interesting or amazing things. And, for me, is even as simple as a project I saw training forklift drivers. But it was very purpose-driven. It made a lot of sense using the technology to help people learn how to drive forklifts. Sounds boring, but this tool, was very useful, was being deployed. People got paid to do it, and now you had, the physical model blended with the visual. Perfectly good sense.
I was also just going to say, I can think of real-world examples of this. Like, I create VR and AR content. That is my job. Do I go home at night and consume VR and AR content? No, not really. But what I do use it for, I was thinking about the things that I use it for. One, I recently moved out of, the home that I had brought my 1.5-year-old up in and into a new home. So I used, VR cameras to document that because I was always curious if he grows up later, will he remember this place? And then second, as we're moving into a new home, I've been using, my iPhone and different AR applications to, visualize renovations and constructions and, furniture and layouts. And I just think, again, I'm using that technology in a way that was not previously possible before.
Yeah, I think spot on. I'm kind of going to dig into that a little bit, though, because I feel like, and it's been said in the halls, that right now, at least VR storytelling is sort of creators talking to creators a lot. It's not really getting out into a broader audience. And so I think utilitarian or utility use cases of VR and whatnot will help drive that. But to you, what will drive a more like broader awareness or broader engagement in terms of VR or AR entertainment? Like, when will it go mainstream is kind of like the simple version.
I was going to say, I think in education, frankly, I think, again, if you're thinking of it as a tool, I mean, a lot of us get into it that it suddenly becomes the destination. And to me, when it starts becoming more of a means to an end, I'm excited about using it and seeing what happens in education where people can be exposed just in the learning process. And that, again, not necessarily VR or AR, but that sort of continuum of tool sets. I think you're the dinosaur example, the human cadaver example. I just keep going to all your projects. But that ability to see the world around us, and I look at travel and teleportation sort of effects, but that taking people to different cultures and educating about different cultures, being able to have real-time view into some other place that isn't just through a rectilinear window, is a fantastic mechanism. And I think that is the thing that will expose people to this world without them thinking, oh, it's this gee whiz technology. It's the, go find a spot on a globe. Well, of course, using Google Earth in the headset now, but what is that next way to visualize
That's
the
a
Earth?
pretty phenomenal experience.
It's a phenomenal experience. I get lost in playing with Google Earth just by zipping around to places and diving into them. But you can see these as tools in education that, again, they're not thought of as, oh, that's the cool gee whiz technology. That's just a better way to pull, to see the layers of a dinosaur.
And I think it's going to go mainstream when it's like, it kind of needs to be this curve of when hardware meets content, because you can have the best hardware and the seamless transition or a seamless sort of touch points into experiencing it. But if you don't have the right content, people are not going to be incentivized to use the technology. And similarly, you can have the best experiences, but if you don't have the hardware to create the seamless experience, then it's not going to go mainstream. And I think that now there is some really interesting pieces of content that exist, but it's just really hard to access it. And for the really high-end experiences, you really, have to go to film festivals or conferences or museums. It's not like you could, some of it is available at home, but not all of it. So I think that's, and even the at-home use, it's a lot to set up, and it's like for me, it takes me like 3 hours to set up my Oculus rig and headset when I have to do it sometimes. And it's, if it's that hard for me, I can't imagine how it is for like somebody who doesn't really work in the field.
I think platform disparity is kind of a big issue right now, between, especially as a content creator, the type of experience that you can have and supply on a mobile device or a mobile VR device or a mobile AR device versus a high-end PC or location-based VR experience are two completely different types of things. And, the demands of a location-based VR experience to have much more robust graphics, there's not big economies of scale there with translating between those two types of experiences. So that's definitely, kind of a challenge while we have this broad spectrum of devices. I think we also haven't yet, as an industry, really sorted out where and why people are consuming VR and what they will and won't pay for. I think that's another thing that people are just kind of testing the waters with a little bit, but we really haven't, I haven't really seen any solid business models that have proved it yet.
Yeah, and I do think right now the location-based experiences are the arcade of the 80s moment. So in the US, in the 80s, you had video game arcades. That's where people were experiencing video games in a way that said, you couldn't get that at home, right? They were the big consoles. You couldn't get those kind of experiences at home, but a lot of folks were like, how can I get some of that? And I see that happening to us in this, where the consumers are going out, they're experiencing things that they can't necessarily get at home, or again, won't spend 3 hours or the money to set it up at home, but they're starting to get that taste of those kind of experiences. You see it moving to next gen when it gets out of the festivals, right? Right now we're stuck to seeing some of the most amazing things in festivals, and that's not where the mainstream consumer is going to be able to experience it yet. So you can see that transition as those kind of things get out of the festivals and into the mainstream. That's that sort of, I think, that moment you can go, aha, we've moved to a next step.
And I was saying earlier, it's almost, it can be really difficult to even see everything at festivals. For those of us that do go, it's impossible to see, I think about Tribeca and Sundance, how, it's very hard to see everything you want to see.
There's a whole business in line management
Well, and I mean, Ted brought it up, the box on the face challenge. if you think about this, we've talked about discrete things, virtual reality, AR. What I like to think about is the continuum of what I call opacity. You got reality on this side and total occlusion on this side. And that sliding scale across here that says, I want to be able to start experiencing things based on context and desire, and not necessarily the piece of hardware that I happen to have in my hand at the moment. If you think about what the cell phone enables you to do today in a lot of different things, sometimes it's my map, sometimes it's my communication device, sometimes it's my information retrieval device. It's contextually based on what I want to do with it. So what is that? Is it the contact lenses? And then what is it being driven by that says, while I'm sitting here on the panel, I want maybe my speaker's notes going in the corner. When I walk out on the street, I want to know where the Starbucks is. I shouldn't have to switch devices. I shouldn't have to that's that next generation for me. The ability to be contextually aware and also to think about the interface model, right? Right now, we still have physical objects we grip in our hands to pretend that they're hands. Yeah. Doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's where we're at.
Yeah. I think even just like stepping it back in terms of interaction design, initially a lot of the directors that I would work with in the space, they were first thinking about story, and then they were thinking about, okay, what can the interaction be around that story? And even with Spheres, it was very much focused on like, what is the story that we're taking people through, and then what is the interactions that people could have within that. And it's interesting to see sort of a shift, and on this new project I'm working on, it's starting with what are interesting interactions, and then what's a story that we can build around the interaction. So even just flipping that it sounds very simple, but it's actually like really meaningful in the overall experience of how the interaction is going to really guide what the story is.
Yeah, I'm curious because you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. So I feel like Hollywood, for lack of better terms, sort of rushed into VR, and it's all new. It's it's never been done before.
It was shiny.
Yeah, it was shiny, but games have been doing interactive stories for decades, and so I think there's a lot of learnings from there. But sort of your point just now, the star of a TV show or movie is the star, is the actor. Where in games, the games has a concept of the 1 minute loop, like what is the addictive playable loop that you get into, and that's really the star of a game. Whether it's Pac-Man going around eating pebbles or whatnot. How much are sort of game design lessons or theories starting to influence some of your work? Can you say?
Yeah, I would, if I look at an interaction model, and I'd step back for just a second to say that I think what's interesting is that, folks would say, well, this is true VR versus that's not true VR. And I kind of want to be okay with if it's content that people want to consume in some way, I don't know if I need to say it's one thing or another. I think there's always going to be that moment where I love the 2-minute clip of a 360 camera dropped in the middle of an elephant herd. Mm-hmm. It has no story, it has no interaction, and I will just sit there and watch those elephants. I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. But then there's different models that move in, and when I look at game design, if you talk to any game, especially first-person game designer, they understand that concept of center of the universe, POV, interactive model. Mm-hmm. They've been trying to tell stories like that for a long time. Now, you can argue how successful they've been in games at telling stories, mm-hmm. but if you talk to good designers, they're usually very frustrated that marketing cut it back or the budget cut it back. It wasn't, I didn't want to tell a good story. And so now they're finding themselves into that medium. So learning from that, learning what we can do in that, is the model that I want to embrace if I'm going to that true interactive 6 degrees of freedom moving throughout the environment.
We were, I think, in terms of game designers, it wasn't long into working into VR that we brought game designers on staff at Framestore. We saw that as a really important piece of the puzzle. I agree with what you're saying. I think some things can be passive and still work. But I think that, we put an emphasis on and we started to look at, when you're creating content, and you give somebody the element of choice, that's a big deal, and you have to kind of create an experience around that element of choice that makes the user feel empowered and like they're in control to some degree of the situation. It can be about addictive behaviors, it can be about narrative, it can be about both of those things. I think it depends on what it is. But I think that somebody who understands the psychology of users' behaviors and can design an experience that's powerful around that is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. So when you're looking at a new property to jump into, I'm actually going to target this at you, Jess, because I'm kind of curious how Spheres came about. And so how do you select a property? Like, how do you decide this is the one I want to get involved with for the next year? Or is it a technical challenge? Is it always the creative? Is it the story? Is it the person you're working with?
Yes. For me, so Eliza McNitt, who wrote and directed this piece, is a fantastic director, and we've worked together previously. So for me, it definitely comes down to the director and really like who is the sort of main creative force and vision behind the project, and do I believe in that person and trust that person and want to help that person? Because when you embark on these journeys, it's a lot of work and there's a lot to figure out, and it's really kind of like going into battle together. So it's first about the relationship, and then it's also about, what is the idea and can we make this? Is this a feasible idea in the marketplace? Is this something people are going to be interested in seeing? And one of the reasons I was really excited about Spheres was because it was about space, and for me, since working with Eliza, I've gotten a chance to learn so much about space and work with scientists and learn about black holes and what it would be like to be inside of a black hole. And so I get to learn along the way. And also it's a great IP to use. It's free. The images that NASA puts out into the world, which was also something that I never really knew about. And so, yeah, it's a combination of the creator and also what is the idea and is there a path to getting this made right now?
No, you take it. No. Yeah, I think I envy that because I also in a company that there's sometimes the going after a bid on a project. Or getting projects that come through the door and then having to go time, resources, budget. But I think there's also looking for those projects where, especially in this space that we want to make, that we can really sink our teeth in and say we can tell that story and do a really good job at it. And I think you still have to look for those and then find a way to make them come to fruition. And I've been lucky enough. I've got several projects that from the outside that I want to bring into digital domain, that when I started taking the team through the synopsis, they were like, oh yeah, we want to do that. And finding those moments. And I think, looking at some of the kind of impact pieces that can be done. Because I really think right now, what seems to resonate in this medium is the way it can affect people and really make a difference. And I think of the stories that need to be told, the causes that need to be championed, and then thinking about how can I bring that to an audience.
I think that's right too. The reality is that very few companies out there have resources to the scale like John's and mine, where we can create this content to a certain scale and degree of quality, and I think that. We try to look at it sometimes as if we have a responsibility to not just take on the big, IP projects and something that might have a good profit. But I think also, we have projects that we look at and we say, is this going to, further our vision of what we hope to see in the market? And if it's not always something that has, a profit attached to it, I think we always try to find a way to invest in things that, that kind of hit to our core values as a company.
Sort of, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's, as somebody who's on more like the indie side of the industry, it's interesting because I would love to work with Framestore on projects or Digital Domain, but the reality is like an independent project doesn't have the kind of budget that would allow for that. So I think also for this industry to be really viable, we need the really high-end companies, the big commercial companies, and we also need really capable smaller studios that can work on more of the independent projects, because that's the only way we're going to also be able to see, younger or emerging creators get made. That's why it's been really great to have found Atlas V, which is the production company in Paris, because they were really able to work within the scope that we had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think, the interesting thing is being able to figure out how, as a company that has done, $100 million, $200 million VFX projects, and we've very distinctly said our XR business is something different. Because again, necessarily the budgets aren't there, especially in this area where a lot of it is the ROI isn't necessarily as tangible as a, mega blockbuster. But to figure out how to scale up or down. But to be able to bring the same level of professionalism and quality to no matter where you hit on that. And I think that's part of the challenge that we go through and want to tackle that, to be able to say it can be that big project, but it also can be a small, scrappy team, and balance that out.
Mm-hmm. I also think, to that point, it's kind of caused us to relook at, how we kind of operationalize and set up our company. I don't have 30 developers or engineers sitting in New York City with me. I have them sitting in Montreal. And, I think it's become something where, we have to look at also how to kind of create a sliding scale, as you say, of quality, but, at different cost options so that it's not so cost prohibitive always for, the real artists that are making important content.
Great. So sort of queuing off something you said, John, there's a whole list of projects I wish I could do. What are you most excited about? What sort of projects do you want to be doing moving forward?
I think I said it before, but some of the most important projects to me are the ones, the impact projects. And I will find a way. I was independently producing before I came to Digital Domain. One particular project called Shades of Red that we're working on funding for, that is about the impact and the recovery process of sexual assault. And it's told through dance and narrative. And it's one of those projects that you're just like, I got to do it. And so figuring out how to make that happen, how to bring the pieces together, is one of those things that I'm going to continue to push through. Because it, to me, as we talked about the project, as we talk about witnesses and victims, people that encourage you to say, you got to go tell that story. Yeah. So that will be one of those things that I will somehow see through fruition.
Great. Do you have a dream project?
Carnegie Arena.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Carnegie Arena is a project that was directed by Alejandro Inarritu, that premiered at Cannes 2 years ago and then is now showing at LACMA.
It's beautiful.
In Los Angeles. And for me, it's an experience that takes you right at the border between Mexico and the U.S. as Mexican immigrants are moving into the U.S. and what happens when they're caught. And it's an incredibly intense experience, and it was also like an incredible installation. It's more about just like the emotional impact that experience had on me. And so to create those kinds of emotional experiences for people is pretty incredible. So that's one side of it. And then I think another side would be, projects that are really about world building, and you get to really inhabit different characters and interact with people in a story world. So something more exploratory and game-like, but also story-driven.
More Game of Thrones. No, I mean the sad thing is this is probably actually true. No, I mean I think that's one of the great things that I love about my job is that I have the opportunity to work on things like Game of Thrones and Harry Potter and all the nerdy stuff that I love. But then also we have the ability to work on projects that do have an impact. One of our projects called Lumen was being used in Stanford for trials to help reduce pain and anxiety going into procedures. And I think, if I had to look at dream projects, as much as I love working on the entertainment stuff, I think, there's a realm of other kind of, more healthcare and education related projects I'd like to work on. I think there's a huge opportunity to create applications that, for mental health issues. I think that's a big crisis in the United States right now, and I think there's a huge opportunity with using VR to lower the barrier to get, help if you need it. And then I also think, again, like we've seen how amazing VR can be in, helping patients that are going through like chemotherapy and things like that. So I'm really interested, that's like kind of a dream. I'm just interested in working in the more utility-based stuff, but I still love good old Game of Thrones.
I'd have to add one, as I was thinking about this, is that it's been a passion to think about the teleportation effect, that taking people to different parts of the world. And, I've done it in 2D, leveraging 360, but really multi-platform, and also bringing the live aspect. Because I found even if you travel around the world and you tell these stories, it always feels like I'm broadcasting. And how do I take the element of, if I'm in a place or a team is in a place and we're exploring, how do we bring people into that, but let them ask questions, participate. Not everybody can travel, but if you can be their eyes, their ears, their hands in a sometimes real-time fashion and way to connect that, I think that's the next piece to me. It says stop being a broadcaster in some cases and be that interactive element from different parts of the planet.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think VR has been very successful at transporting you to someplace. There's been a lot of phenomenal documentary work, but I think now sharing that experience, and then being able to interact with those people, I think could be a great sort of next wave in that. With the audience in mind, as sort of people get into this and as it's a sort of a growing medium, what are the sort of skills and talents you're looking for in people you collaborate with? A lot of the work I've done has been with writers. I think writers are hugely powerful for the medium. I tend to find theater backgrounds to be particularly helpful. John, who or what types of skill sets are you looking for?
There's a couple of them. I think if I was going to use the phrase hyphenate, and that means people that aren't necessarily one particular discipline. And I come from a space that I'm both a technologist and a creator, and I look at this medium right now, and it's understanding that it isn't just understanding how to write, but to potentially produce, or it isn't necessarily just being a director, but also potentially understanding the technology underneath. So it's those people that embrace the larger aspect of this, and understand that it isn't purely this or that. It's what I love is we talked about game design coming into it, and it's game design, it's interactive theory, it's user experience. Being able to test, what people are doing. It's understanding interface design. It's all of these things, these disciplines that are coming together. And so, dealing with people who are like, oh, no, I don't do that. I just do this. I don't find useful.
Yeah, that's very well said. Just because that's one of the reasons why I love working in this space is because I came from working in the film world, and what I love about this space is that it is this convergence of people who were in gaming or in film or in developers and technology and immersive theater, and so I think curiosity is a good trait, which is why I name my company Crimes of Curiosity, because I think that is sort of the thread that is going to lead you, to explore and test and discover and do things that haven't been done before, because that's basically what we're doing all the time. So curiosity and then collaboration, because it's a lot of people working on these things together. It's not a one-man shop. And so to be able to work with other people and listen and take advice, but also have your vision, or kind of the people that I think are doing the most interesting stuff are also people that are pushing themselves and just really trying. You have to continue to do that.
I echo all of those sentiments, and I would add to that humility, which is probably a hard word in our field of work, I think. I think, we're all used to working with, directors and different egos and personalities and things, and I think, that's fine to some degree, but you do need a level of humility when you're approaching something that you don't know or is new to you. You need to have the, you can't be afraid to fail, and you need to keep trying things out, and you need to listen and look for answers in different places than yourself or where you usually look. And I think that is probably the third thing.
Yeah, I think we've all had probably very similar experiences in that regard, and I tend to think of separating passion from expertise. Anybody that comes in and thinks they're the expert is probably going to get some, bruises.
I get real leery of people that are like, I'm the expert, or the long-term professional in this space, right? The people are like, oh, I've been we're all babies in this,
we're all
right?
just
and
journeymen.
Yeah, it's just constantly reinventing, and that's the fun part. But you get a little leery of that. Yeah, I think it does go back to humility.
Yeah, but passion is critical, I think. So I think that was our time. I want to thank the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you all.
And thanks, Eddie and Sandbox, for having us.
Thanks, Eddie, for our summer camp.